different. In this session, we are going to discuss on concept of ecology in ecosystem with a major, looking into ecosystem function. In the last session, we have looked into the basic concept of ecology and ecosystem from ecosystem structural point of view. Now, let us have a look into the basic concept of ecosystem function. As you know, this session is part of postgraduate diploma in sustainability science, and for the course MSc 012 ecosystem and natural resource natural resources. What is ecosystem function? When we know the ecosystem structure in the last session, then how those structure function, how the interaction between and among different members of that biotic community and between biotic and abiotic community works. As you know, ecosystem is a dynamic assemblage of biotic and abiotic components which interact among themselves and perform different functions. Some of the major functional aspects of an ecosystem can be defined or can be looked into energy flow, production, decomposition, nutrient cycling, succession. You know, is when you study about the basic structure of ecosystem, we know that in the food chain, energy are transferred from one trophic level to another trophic level. That flow of energy is unidirectional. Then, as we know, in that process of food chain, assimilation of biomass happen, and this assimilation of biomass by different components of an ecosystem is called production. And the rate of biomass production by living being in an ecosystem is defined as productivity. Then, when that happens, decomposition takes place, and decomposition is breaking down of that plant and animal and their excreta into simple compound like carbon dioxide and water and nutrients. And then decomposition is taken place due to the presence of bacteria and fungi. Then those nutrients, those energy, especially those nutrients, they are moved from one compartment to another, and they also, as you know, they also move from one trophic level to another trophic level. That movement of elements of compound through the living beings and across the ecosystem in a form of well-defined characteristic pathways is called nutrient cycling. Succession is sequential change in community structure resulting in the establishment of stable or climax community. This is a natural process of establishing or reaching to the climax community from, there's the whole cycle of establishing climax, stable community or stable ecosystem. Then let us see what is energy flow. As you know, the energy flows through the system when organisms is eaten by each other, means through the food chain. So the relationship between what the organism eats and what it is eaten by, in this process, the flow of energy happen, and this energy flow in this ecosystem is in the form of carbon-carbon bonds. When carbon-carbon bonds are broken, that energy is released, which then can be used by the organism. That energy is used by organism, or otherwise it dissipated as a heat in the environment. While the energy flows through an ecosystem, only a portion of the energy available to the organism is actually stored by the organism. As when we talk about 10% energy law, then thus the total energy in one trophic level never flows to the next level. Some of it, majority of that energy is lost. That simply means that the lower trophic level always contain more total energy than the higher trophic levels. On the other hand, we know that energy doesn't recycle But ultimately, all energy that is brought into an ecosystem is lost as heat. And so, that's why Lindemann in 1942 put forward a 10% law for the transfer of energy from one trophic level to the next. According to the notion of 10% law, during the transfer of organic food from one trophic level to the next, only about 10% of organic matter is stored as a flash. Here you will see the remaining is lost during the transfer or gets broken down in respiration. Plant utilize, if you look into the basic flow, first plant utilize sun energy for production and can store only about 10% of the utilized energy as net production available for the herbivores. If you take only 10%, when these plants are consumed by animal, and about 10% of the energy in the food is fixed into animal flesh, which is available for next trophic level, that is carnivore. When this carnivore is consumed, that animal only about 10% of energy is fixed in its flesh for next hair level. So at this transfer, 80 to 90% of the potential energy is dissipated as heat, something called is second law of thermodynamics. So only 10 to 20% energy is available to the next trophic level. This is what Linden 10% law states. So this energy transformation that occurs within an ecosystem, this is called ecological energetic. So if you look that the quantity of solar energy entering into the Earth atmosphere is about 15.3 into 10 to the power 8 calories per square meter per year. But the average amount of solar energy per unit area or per unit time actually only it's available to the autotroph. That's also depend upon their geographical location. That's why when we start the structure, ecosystem structure, that geography, location is also one of the important characteristics. So only the photosynthetically active radiation is the energy available to autotroph. So major portion of that is 90 to 95% of energy is lost in the form of heat of evaporation and sensible heat, while only 1 to 5% is used for photosynthesis primary production. Hence, energy transfer is not 100% efficient, and there is degradation of energy from a non-random to a random form. So if you look from energy conservation or energy conserving efficiency of different ecosystem, we know that ecosystem, that efficiency of that particular energy flow is depend on the place and geographical location, depending upon the structure of that ecosystem. So if you, from that point, the energy conserving efficiency of the grassland is 1.5%, then 0.9% for savanna, 0.81% for mixed forest, 5% for moss crop, and 10 to 12% for a sugarcane field. The next is ecosystem function is process of production. In an ecosystem, autotroph, that is green plants, algae, some of the bacteria, so they synthesize organic food by the process of photosynthesis or chemosynthesis. In the process of photosynthesis, as we know that plant take carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, water from the environment, and radiant energy from the sun. That is the first energy, and produce food in the form of carbohydrates. This accumulation of organic matter by the plant is called primary production. And that plant, that heterotroph organism that fit on the autotroph, that the producer and accumulate biomass in their body, that is termed as secondary production. Then primary production, secondary production. And then what is productivity? The amount of organic matter or biomass produced by an individual organisms, population, community or ecosystem during a given period of time is called productivity. The total amount of solar energy converted, that is fixed into chemical energy by green plant, is called gross primary production. That 10%, that a certain portion of that GPP, means gross primary production, is utilized by plants for own maintenance, and largely respiratory energy losses happen. And after losing this energy for own utilization, the remaining energy stored in that plant is called net primary production, as we know, which appears as we call it as a plant biomass. This primary production is very important, especially very important in ecology, because it is the energy fixed by the plants by converting solar energy into chemical energy of food material that support life in another trophic level. This is the first level. This NPP, or we call as plant biomass. Here you look into the biochemical equation that describes the process of photosynthesis. This molecule of carbon dioxide plus the molecule of water. We know that carbon dioxide here from and water molecule from the environment, and that green plant again in the presence of sunlight that produce that biomass, carbohydrate, plus gives of oxygen and water molecule also. Then what is secondary production? Then the net quantity of energy transferred and stored in the bodies of heterotrophic over a period of time is called secondary production. Some heterotrophs may be consumer decomposers that fit on that net primary production, and some on other heterotrophic consumer. So this the rate of increase in the biomass of heterotrophs per unit time and area is called secondary productivity. That secondary productivity serves as an index of significance of the population in terms of food resources available to the heterotrophic population, including man in the food chain system. So this is about the concept of primary production, secondary production, primary productivity, secondary productivity. This herbivore and herbivores and carnivores ingest the food material where a part of this is assimilated and a part is digested. A large part of assimilated food, that is energy, is utilized for their own metabolism, especially for respiration, growth, reproduction, maintenance of body and other activities. So the remaining part is stored in somatic and reproductive tissue, and thus they are called as net production. Thus it is compared to that of the net production. So if you look into that process chemically, carbon that enters the ecosystem is gross primary production, GPP accumulates within the ecosystem and returns to the atmosphere via respiration, though it gives out carbon dioxide, or disturbance, or is transported laterally to other ecosystem. About half of the gross primary production is required by plants to provide energy that support their growth and maintenance. Plant lose carbon through several pathways besides respiration. The largest of these releases is typically in transfer of carbon is from plants is to the soil. Okay, because respiration, so this occurs, how it transfer through the soil, it occurs through litter fall, then root exudation, and carbon transfers to microbes that are symbiotically associated with that roots. That is called mycorrhiza or nitrogen fixing bacteria. So this carbon transfer from plants to soil eventually gives rise to that's called soil organic matter, which is typically largest pool of ecosystem carbon. So you will see here how the carbon flux is happening in the terrestrial ecosystem. Then you will see how the nutrient cycle and the carbon cycle here. So when it is accumulated, the carbon is accumulated in the plant. Herbivores also at the same time the first it transferred to the soil, that's formed soil organic matter, that carbon pool of soil organic matter, and at the same time herbivores also remove carbon from the plants. This account about 5 to 10% of NPP in terrestrial ecosystem, but it can be less than 1% in some forests, greater than 50% in some grassland, because there is uneven distribution. So herbivores account for most of the carbon loss from the plants and aquatic ecosystem. So plants also release carbon to the atmosphere through emission of volatile organic compounds or by combustion in fires. So this volatile emission typically account for less than 1% of net primary production, but this plant gives their distinctive smells in that governs the behavior of many herbivores and are an important component of atmospheric chemistry. So finally, carbon can be removed, in the process of harvest by human. So we harvest and that also remove carbon from the vegetation. This is how the carbon cycle is happening. So this carbon balance of ecosystem depends not only on the carbon balance of vegetation but also on the respiration of heterotrophs organism that it live on that organic matter. This heterotrophic respiration by microbes and animals that converts organic matter to carbon dioxide, which is lost from the ecosystem to the atmosphere. See, from the heterotroph, so decomposition process also that gives out carbon dioxide, in the respiration. So in some ecosystem, that fire also transforms additional organic matter to carbon dioxide, which moves to the atmosphere. That's also gives carbon dioxide in the fire. When you fire, it gives out carbon dioxide. So that contents of carbon in that ecosystem also gives out to the atmosphere when it burns. So finally, another process is finally carbon leaches from the ecosystem in the form of dissolved particulates and moves literally through the erosion, deposition of soil, then sometimes movement of animals from one part of that ecosystem to another part or from an ecosystem to another ecosystem. So this biomass production by plants determines the amounts of energy available to sustain all organisms, including the human. So we depend on plant production directly for food and fiber and indirectly because of the critical role of vegetation in all ecosystem processes. So it is about carbon. Carbon is important. So much of the carbon produced by plants that eventually moves to the soil, as we know, where it influences the capacity of soils to retain water and nutrients, and therefore by retaining that water and nutrients support the plant production. So carbon cycling through the ecosystem is also directly affects Earth's climates by modifying the concentration of atmospheric carbon dioxide, right? Because it gives all carbon to the atmosphere directly also. So when you burn it, if human interference is there, then we burn it also. Then because of the many critical roles of this carbon balance in the biosphere and the Earth system, and especially the recent rapid change in carbon cycling on the plant's ecosystem is one of the fundamental issues we are facing today, and which is very important to understand this cycle of carbon in the ecosystem. This is how production processes in ecosystem function. Right? These are the basic concept of production process in an ecosystem. The another ecosystem function is, we have that energy flow, then decomposition. Decomposition is the physical and chemical breakdown of detritus or that organic matter, that is, that plant, animal, microbial material, which results into release of carbon to the atmosphere and of nutrients in the form that can be used for plant and microbial production. If there were no decomposition, ecosystem would quickly accumulate large quantities of detritus, leading to a sequestration of nutrients in the forms that are unavailable to plants and depletion of atmospheric carbon dioxide. That shows that without decomposition, your transfer of the material will not happen, right? Nutrient cycling, that cycle of carbon will not happen. So depletion of this resource in non-decomposing detritus would eventually cause many biological processes to a halt. There have been times such as the Carboniferous period when decomposition did not keep pace with primary production, leading to vast accumulation of carbon containing coal and oil. So the balance between what we are talking about, net primary production and decomposition, therefore strongly influence carbon cycling at ecosystem and global scale, at different scale. So decomposition will play a key important role in functioning the ecosystem. If you look at global warming, which is associated with anthropogenic carbon dioxide emission, to cause small changes, it is caused because of small changes in the balance between that NPP, net primary production, and decomposition. So the carbon dioxide concentration in the atmosphere If you change small concentration in emission, changes in emission, and the balance in net primary production, the carbon dioxide concentration in the atmosphere would be greatly altered, and therefore, so the rate of global warming also be altered. So understanding the impact of decomposition of carbon cycling is very much important and thus critical for making projection about the future state of Earth's climate. How decomposition is happening? Decomposition happens in three types of processes with different controls and consequences. One is leaching, fragmentation, chemical alteration. In leaching, it is happened by water transfer soluble materials away from the decomposing organic matter into the soil matrix. The soluble materials are absorbed by the organism, react with the mineral phase of the soil, or are lost from the system in solution. Another process is fragmentation by soil animals, that are soil microorganisms, that breaks large species of organic matter into smaller ones, which provide a food source for soil animals and create fresh surfaces for microbial colonization. The soil animals also mix the decomposing organic matter into the soil. The another is chemical alteration of the organic matter, which is primarily a consequence of the activity of those decomposer bacteria and fungi, and some of chemical reaction also occur spontaneously with that in the soil without that microbial mediation. So these are the three important key processes that decomposition is happening. In this dead plant material, litter and animal residues are gradually decomposed until their original identity is no longer recognizable, at which point they are considered as soil organic matter. Litter consists primarily of compounds that are too large and insoluble to pass through microbial membranes. So microbes therefore secrete exoenzymes, as we also call extracellular enzymes, into their environment to initiate breakdown of litter. That's exoenzyme converts that macromolecules into soluble products that can be absorbed and metabolized by microbes. The consequences of this decomposition are the mineralization of organic matter to inorganic components like carbon dioxide, mineral nutrients, and water, and the transformation of organic matter into complex organic compounds that are recalcitrant, that is resistant to further microbial breakdown. So in other words, decomposition occurs to meet the energetic and nutritional demand of a decomposer organism. And that should not be tagged. This decomposition is not as a community service for the carbon cycle. This play an important role, decomposition play an important role in the carbon cycle, but it occurs to meet the energetic nutritional demand of decomposer organism. The another ecosystem function is nutrient cycling. Like carbon cycle, all the nutrients, so the matter and energy is transferred. Like the energy transfer, matter is transfer, right? So this nutrient also transfer from one trophic structure to other, and one component to the other component of the ecosystem. So this nutrient cycling involves, what is nutrient cycling? It involves the entry of nutrients to the ecosystem, and when it enters into ecosystem, their internal transfers means between plant and soils. First plants and soil, then they are lost from the ecosystem. Means nutrient cycling is input of nutrients, that by magnification of that nutrients inside that ecosystem and losing some part of that nutrients outside the ecosystem boundary. So this nutrient enters ecosystem through chemical weathering of rocks, biological fixation of atmospheric nitrogen, and deposition of nutrient from the atmospheric in rain, wind-blown particles, or gases. In case of many ecosystem, fertilization is an additional nutrient input. So then, how internal cycling processes happen? These internal cycling processes include the conversion of those nutrients that enters to the ecosystem from organic to inorganic form, then chemical reactions that change elements from one ionic form to another. Then it is uptake by biological uptake by plants and microorganisms, and the exchange of nutrients on surfaces within the soil matrix. Then the loss of nutrients from the ecosystem is through leaching, trace gas emission, what we talk about, wind and water erosion, fire, and the removal of material in harvest. This process we have all the concept have already discussed before. So in this process, most of the nitrogen and phosphorus required for plant growth in unmanaged ecosystem is supplied by the decomposition of plant litter and soil organic matter. Here you will see that decomposition plays an important role in giving nutrients. The inputs and outputs in this ecosystem are a small fraction of the quantity of nutrients that cycle internally. So producing relatively closed system with conservative nutrient cycle. So it enters small amount, it produces a large amount, but it goes in a small amount only. So human activities tend to increase inputs and outputs related to the internal transfer and make the element cycle more open. That's for example, when talk about the crop production and all these things, and then we put more input for getting more output of nutrients, right? There are important difference among elements, their pattern of biogeochemical cycling. You will see when you study in different biogeochemical cycle in the terrestrial ecosystem and different ecosystem. So this anthropogenic disturbance like conversion of forest, means forest conservation, then harvest, even fire. And this increases the proportion of nutrient pool that is available, and therefore it is more vulnerable to loss from the ecosystem. Natural process, it comes in small and produce more and it goes in small, but with this forest conversion, our anthropogenic disturbances, we harvest more. So some of those losses occur by leaching of dissolved elements to the groundwater, causing depletion of soil cations that affect to the soil fertility, increase in soil acidity, and increase in nutrient inputs to aquatic ecosystem, from terrestrial to the aquatic ecosystem. That natural process of small input in the aquatic ecosystem of nutrients, now with our anthropogenic disturbance, we have give more inputs to the aquatic ecosystem. So gases loss of nitrogen influence the chemical and radiative properties of atmosphere when there is no in the balanced way. A natural ratio of different composition of atmosphere, of course, it affect to other components. So that cause air pollution and enhancing the greenhouse effect. Like the combustion of fossil fuel that release huge quantities of nitrogen sulfur oxide to the atmosphere and increase their inputs to the ecosystem. Fertilization and cultivation nitrogen fixing crops, they have further increased the fluxes of nitrogen in agricultural ecosystem together. And if you look, these human impacts have doubled the natural background rate of nitrogen inputs to the terrestrial biosphere. So changes in the cycling of different nutrients therefore dramatically affect the interaction within the ecosystem also, as well as the carbon cycle and the climate of the earth. Thus, in this way, ecosystem function through the process of energy flow, production, decomposition, and nutrient cycling. At last, in the natural processes, if human is not there, natural process succession follows, that is sequential change in the community structure that result in establishment of stable or climax community, which is well defined in this figure. That first bare rocks, Moses likened that process of that breaking down of soil, soil develop, plant, then thickness of plant and trees start to grow, and then in this way natural way of primary succession, secondary succession happen. So these are a few of the references I depend for this presentation. So today with this in this session we have touched upon the basic concept of ecology and ecosystem, how the ecosystem function, the function of ecosystem. Thank you very much.